Rich man forces black waitress to sing to mock her, but her voice leaves everyone speechless. The crystal chandelier cast dancing shadows across the pristine white tablecloths of Le Bernardin, where silence cost more than most people's monthly rent. But tonight, that silence would be shattered in ways no one could predict. Mariah Johnson moved through the dining room like a ghost, her worn black flats making barely a whisper against the polished marble floor. At 24, she carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone who had learned early that invisibility was often survival. Her uniform was pressed to perfection despite being 3 years old, her hair pulled back in a simple bun that her grandmother had taught her to make when she was 12. But what caught the eye of those who bothered to look, and most didn't, was the small piece of yellowed sheet music folded carefully and pinned to her apron pocket. The edges were worn soft from handling, the notes faded but still visible. It was all she had left of her mother's dreams. "Table 7 needs their wine refilled," barked Marcus, the head waiter, barely glancing up from his clipboard. "And try to smile, Mariah. You look like you're at a funeral." If only he knew how close to the truth that was. Mariah's grandmother had been in and out of the hospital 3 times this month, and the medical bills were piling up like autumn leaves. Her little brother Isaiah was only 16, still in high school, still believing that good grades and big dreams were enough to change their circumstances. Someone had to keep that dream alive for him, even if it meant swallowing her own. She approached table 7 with the practiced grace of someone who had spent 4 years perfecting the art of being unnoticed. The table was occupied by 5 men in $1,000 suits, their laughter sharp and ugly as broken glass. At the head sat Vincent Ross, a man whose real estate empire had been built on pushing out families just like Mariah's from their neighborhoods. Vincent was the kind of man who believed his money gave him permission to treat people like entertainment. At 52, he had the soft belly of someone who had never worked with his hands and the hard eyes of someone who enjoyed watching others struggle. His wedding ring caught the light as he gestured dismissively at his phone, where he was showing his companions a news article about another urban renewal project. "Can you believe they're calling it gentrification?" Vincent laughed, his voice carrying across the quiet restaurant. "I prefer improvement. We're improving these neighborhoods, bringing in a better class of people." Mariah's hand trembled slightly as she reached for his wine glass, but she said nothing. She had learned long ago that responding to men like Vincent only made things worse. "Excuse me, miss." Vincent's voice cut through her concentration like a blade. "I said excuse me." Mariah looked up, meeting his pale blue eyes for just a moment before looking away. "Yes, sir? How can I help you?" Vincent's smile was the kind that never reached the eyes, the kind that promised nothing good. "My friends and I were just discussing talent. Natural talent versus, shall we say, artificial enhancement." He gestured vaguely at the restaurant's classical music playing softly in the background. "We were wondering if anyone working here might have any hidden talents." The other men at the table shifted uncomfortably, but none of them spoke up. Mariah recognized the type, followers who would watch Vincent tear someone down rather than risk becoming his next target. "I'm not sure I understand, sir," Mariah said quietly, though something cold was settling in her stomach. Vincent's eyes had found the sheet music in her pocket, and his smile widened. "Oh, I think you do. What's that you have there? Music?" Before she could step back, he had reached out and plucked the fragile paper from her apron. "Please," Mariah whispered, her composure cracking for the first time. That's private. Someone to watch over me," Vincent read aloud, his voice dripping with mock curiosity. "How touching. And look at this. It says, 'For my little songbird, may you soar. Love, Mama.'" He held the paper up for his friends to see, ignoring the way Mariah's hands had started to shake. The restaurant seemed to grow quieter, other diners beginning to notice the commotion. Mariah could feel their eyes on her, could feel the familiar burn of humiliation rising in her chest. But underneath that, something else was building, something that had been buried for too long. "Tell me," Vincent continued, leaning back in his chair like a king holding court. "Can you actually sing? Or is this just some pathetic memento from a failed dream?" The words hit Mariah like physical blows. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory. "Music isn't just sound, baby girl. It's truth. It's everything we can't say with words alone." "Sir, please," she tried again, reaching for the sheet music. "I need to get back to work." But Vincent pulled it away, holding it just out of reach. Oh no, I don't think so. You see, my friends and I have had a long day making important decisions, spending important money. We deserve a little entertainment with our dinner. His voice grew louder, more theatrical. And since you're so attached to this little piece of paper, why don't you give us a song? The restaurant had gone completely silent now. Even the soft classical music seemed to fade into the background. Mariah could feel every eye in the room on her, could sense the mixture of curiosity and discomfort from the other diners. The staff had stopped what they were doing, Marcus hovering near the kitchen door with a look of barely concealed panic. I, I can't, Mariah whispered. Can't. Vincent's eyebrows rose in mock surprise. Or won't. Because I have to tell you, the service here tonight has been absolutely terrible. Slow, unfriendly, and now uncooperative. I'm thinking this might be the kind of thing that affects your employment status. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Mariah knew Vincent had the kind of influence that could not only get her fired from Lou Bernardine, but blacklisted from every decent restaurant in the city. She thought of her grandmother's medicine, of Isaiah's college applications, of the bills that would pile up if she lost this job. But she also thought of her mother. Celeste Johnson had been a singer once, back before life and responsibility had worn down her dreams to nothing. She had died when Mariah was 19, her voice silenced by the cancer that had eaten away at her lungs, the same lungs that had once filled rooms with magic. The sheet music in Vincent's hand was the only piece of that magic Mariah had left. Well, Vincent prompted, his voice cutting through her memories. We're waiting. Mariah looked around the restaurant at the faces staring back at her. Some looked uncomfortable, others curious, a few openly hostile. She thought about walking away, about letting Vincent keep the music and finding some way to survive the consequences. But then she heard it, not with her ears, but with her heart. Her mother's voice, singing the lullabies that had carried her through countless dark nights. The voice that had whispered promises that someday, somehow, music would set them free. Give me the music, Mariah said quietly. Vincent's smile faltered slightly. What did you say? I said give me the music. This time her voice was stronger, carrying across the silent restaurant like a challenge. For a moment, Vincent looked uncertain, as if he had expected her to break, to run, to disappear back into the invisibility that had protected her for so long. But Mariah was no longer interested in protection. You want a song? She asked, her voice growing stronger with each word. Then give me what's mine, and I'll give you what you asked for. Vincent's eyes narrowed, but he was too committed now to back down in front of his friends and the watching crowd. He tossed the sheet music onto the table between them, the fragile paper landing like a gauntlet thrown down. Mariah picked up the music with hands that were no longer trembling. She smoothed out the wrinkles carefully, reverently, as if she were handling something sacred. Because to her it was. She looked up at Vincent, at his cruel smile and his cold eyes, at the faces of his friends who were already pulling out their phones to record what they expected to be her humiliation. She looked at the other diners, the staff, the entire room full of people who saw her as nothing more than entertainment, a curiosity, a moment's distraction from their privileged lives. And then she opened her mouth, and everything changed. The first note that escaped Mariah's lips was barely above a whisper, a trembling thread of sound that seemed to hang in the air like morning mist. But there was something in that single note, something raw and honest and heartbreaking, that made every person in Lou Bernardine lean forward without realizing they were doing it. She had chosen someone to watch over me, not because Vincent had read it aloud, but because it was the song her mother had been humming the last time Mariah had seen her conscious. It was the song that had played in the hospital room when the machines finally went quiet. There's a somebody I'm longing to see, Mariah sang, her voice still soft but growing stronger with each word. I hope that he turns out to be someone to watch over me. The melody flowed from her like water finding its way downhill, natural and inevitable. But it wasn't the technical perfection that stopped conversations and made phones slip from suddenly nerveless fingers. It was the truth in every note, the way she sang not just the words but the weight they carried. Vincent's smug expression was already beginning to falter. He had expected karaoke-level embarrassment, maybe a few off-key notes that would provide him and his friends with weeks of amusing stories. He had not expected this. Mariah closed her eyes, and suddenly, she wasn't standing in the middle of an upscale restaurant surrounded by strangers. She was 5 years old again, curled up in her mother's lap, while Celeste sang away the nightmares. She was 12, learning the harmony parts while her mother cooked dinner in their tiny kitchen. She was 17, harmonizing through tears as her mother grew too weak to carry the melody alone. "I'm a little lamb who's lost in the wood," she continued, and now her voice was filling the restaurant, reaching into corners where the expensive sound system had never quite managed to penetrate. "I know I could always be good to one who'll watch over me." A woman at table 3 pressed her hand to her chest, tears threatening to spill over. An elderly man near the window removed his glasses to wipe his eyes. Even the busboys had stopped clearing tables, standing frozen with dirty plates in their hands as Mariah's voice washed over them. But it was Vincent's face that told the real story. The cruel smile had completely disappeared, replaced by something that might have been confusion, or recognition, or fear. For the first time in years, Vincent Ross was hearing something that his money couldn't buy, couldn't own, couldn't control. Mariah opened her eyes and looked directly at him as she sang the bridge, her voice swelling with a power that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than breath, deeper than technique. This was the voice her mother had passed down to her, the voice that had carried their family through generations of struggle and loss and small victories. "Although he may not be the man some girls think of as handsome," she sang. And now there was something almost defiant in the way she held Vincent's gaze. "To my heart, he carries the key." The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Here was a young black woman, forced to perform for the amusement of a wealthy white man, and somehow she had turned the tables without saying a word. She was no longer his entertainment. He had become her audience. Marcus, the head waiter, stood transfixed near the kitchen door. In 4 years of working with Mariah, he had never heard her raise her voice, let alone sing. Now he was wondering how many other secrets his quiet, invisible waitress had been keeping. At table 12, restaurant critic Jonathan Mills sat with his fork halfway to his mouth, his review of Le Bernardin's latest menu completely forgotten. He had been dining in fine establishments for 20 years, had heard everything from opera singers at charity galas to jazz musicians at intimate supper clubs. But he had never heard anything like this. Raw talent discovering itself in real time, pain transforming into beauty before his eyes. Mariah's voice soared into the final verse, no longer careful or contained. She was singing for her mother now, for every dream that had been deferred, for every night she had fallen asleep to the sound of Celeste's voice promising that someday things would be different. "Someone to watch over me," she sang, the last note lingering in the air like an echo of everything that had ever been lost and everything that might still be found. The silence that followed was absolute. For a long moment, no one moved. No one breathed. It was as if the entire restaurant had been placed under a spell, frozen in the aftermath of something they couldn't quite comprehend. Then, slowly, someone began to clap. It was the elderly man near the window, his applause slow and deliberate and full of recognition. A woman at another table joined him, then another, and another, until the entire restaurant was on its feet, clapping not with the polite enthusiasm reserved for dinner entertainment, but with the kind of appreciation usually reserved for moments that change you. Mariah stood in the center of it all, the sheet music still clutched in her hands, tears streaming down her face. But these weren't tears of humiliation or pain. These were tears of recognition. The recognition that something that had been buried inside her for too long had finally found its way to the surface. Vincent remained seated, his face pale and his hands still flat on the table. For perhaps the first time in his adult life, he was completely at a loss for words. He had set out to humiliate this young woman, to remind her of her place in the social order he had spent his life constructing and maintaining. Instead, he had unleashed something that made his wealth, his power, his carefully constructed world seem suddenly small and meaningless. "That was," one of his companions started to say, then trailed off, unable to find adequate words. Mariah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and carefully folded the sheet music, tucking it back into her apron pocket. The applause was still going on around her, but she had already begun to retreat back into herself, back into the safety of invisibility. "I should get back to work," she said quietly, her voice still carrying traces of the power that had just filled the room. But Vincent wasn't finished with her yet. Something in him had been shaken loose by her performance, something he didn't understand and couldn't control. And Vincent Ross had built his entire life on control. "Wait," he said, his voice sharp enough to cut through the applause. The restaurant gradually fell quiet again, sensing that the evening's drama was far from over. Mariah turned back to him, her guard already going back up. She had learned not to trust moments of kindness from men like Vincent. They usually came with a price. "That was quite a performance," Vincent said, standing slowly. His smile was returning, but it was different now. Harder, more dangerous. "Quite impressive, actually. Tell me, where did you learn to sing like that?" The question seemed innocent enough, but Mariah could hear the trap hidden beneath it. "My mother taught me," she said simply. "Your mother?" Vincent nodded thoughtfully. "And what happened to her? Did she make it? Did she become the star she dreamed of being?" Mariah's jaw tightened. "She died." "Oh." Vincent's smile widened. "How tragic. So much talent, so little opportunity. But that's the way it goes, isn't it? Some people are born to serve, and others are born to be served." The words hit the room like a slap. The applause died completely, replaced by an uncomfortable shifting as people began to realize that Vincent wasn't finished humiliating her. If anything, her talent had only made him more determined to put her back in what he considered her proper place. "You know what I think?" Vincent continued, his voice carrying easily across the silent restaurant. "I think you should be grateful for this opportunity. How many people get to perform in a place like this? How many people in your situation get to entertain their betters?" The racism in his words was subtle but unmistakable, delivered with the kind of polished cruelty that came from a lifetime of practice. Several diners looked away uncomfortably, but no one spoke up. No one wanted to get involved. Mariah felt the familiar burn of shame and anger rising in her chest, but this time something else rose with it. Her mother's voice, not singing now, but speaking, words she had repeated like a prayer during the hardest times. "Don't let anyone make you smaller than you are, baby girl. Don't let them dim your light just because it hurts their eyes." "You're right," Mariah said, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Some people are born to serve, and others are born to be served. But I don't think you understand which one you are." Vincent's face darkened. "Excuse me." "You heard me." Mariah took a step closer to his table, no longer the invisible waitress, but something altogether more dangerous. "You think your money makes you better than me? You think your power gives you the right to treat people like entertainment?" The restaurant held its breath. This was no longer a performance. This was a confrontation, and everyone could sense that the outcome would matter far beyond this single evening. "You came here tonight thinking you could humiliate me," Mariah continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "You thought you could take something precious from me and use it to make yourself feel bigger. But all you did was show everyone in this room exactly what kind of man you really are." Vincent stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the marble floor. "How dare you speak to me that way? Do you have any idea who I am?" "Yes," Mariah said simply. "You're the kind of man who builds his fortune by tearing down other people's homes. You're the kind of man who thinks cruelty is entertainment. You're the kind of man who mistakes fear for respect." Around the restaurant, phones were being quietly raised. What had started as an attempt to record a humiliating moment had become something else entirely. A confrontation between two different worlds, two different ways of being human. "You're fired," Vincent snarled, his composure finally cracking completely. "I'll make sure you never work in this city again." But Mariah was no longer afraid of his threats. She had found something tonight that was more powerful than his money, more lasting than his influence. She had found her voice, and she was just getting started. The aftermath of Mariah's confrontation with Vincent Ross spread through Luke Bernardine like ripples through still water. In the moments following Vincent's threat to end her career, the restaurant hummed with whispered conversations and the soft clicking of phones as videos were shared and reshared. Marcus approached Mariah with the careful steps of someone walking through a minefield. His face was a mask of professional concern, but his eyes held something that might have been admiration mixed with terror. "Mariah," he said quietly, glancing nervously toward Vincent's table where the real estate mogul was having an intense, hushed conversation with his companions. "We need to talk." In the back, Mariah nodded, her adrenaline still running high, but her practical mind already beginning to catalog the consequences of what she had just done. She followed Marcus through the swinging doors into the kitchen, where the staff pretended to be busy with their prep work while obviously straining to hear every word. "What were you thinking?" Marcus hissed once they were in his small office behind the dish pit. "Vincent Ross? Do you have any idea what you've just done?" "I know exactly what I've done," Mariah replied, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "I stood up for myself." "You stood up for yourself?" Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Mariah, that man owns half the commercial real estate in this part of the city. He could shut us down with a phone call." "He could." "He could what?" Mariah interrupted. "Ruin my life? Take away my job?" "Marcus, look around. I work 60 hours a week for barely enough to keep my family afloat. I live in a studio apartment with my 16-year-old brother because it's all we can afford. What exactly am I supposed to be protecting here?" Marcus stared at her, perhaps seeing her clearly for the first time in the 4 years they had worked together. The quiet, invisible waitress who never complained, never caused trouble, never missed a shift had been replaced by someone he didn't recognize, someone with fire in her eyes and steel in her voice. "The owner wants to see you," he said finally. "Now." Mariah made her way to the small office above the restaurant where Gerard Dubois, Lou Bernardin's owner, waited behind an antique desk that probably cost more than she made in a year. Gerard was a small, precise man in his 60s who had built his reputation on maintaining the kind of establishment where scenes like tonight's simply didn't happen. "Sit," he said without looking up from his phone, which was buzzing constantly with what Mariah assumed were messages about the evening's events. She sat, folding her hands in her lap and waiting for the inevitable. "In 30 years of running restaurants," Gerard began, finally looking up at her, "I have never had an evening quite like this one. Social media is, how do you say, exploding. There are already 3 videos of your performance on Instagram with thousands of views. TikTok, Twitter, Facebook. It seems the entire world has discovered my waitress can sing." Mariah waited, knowing there was more coming. "There are also," Gerard continued, "several videos of your conversation with Mr. Ross. The comments are very interesting. Many people are calling you brave. Others are calling you foolish. Mr. Ross himself has called me personally to demand your immediate termination." And Mariah asked, though she already knew the answer. "And he is a very important customer. His company has several events booked here for the next year. His friends, his business associates, they represent a significant portion of our revenue." Gerard stood and walked to the window overlooking the dining room, where the evening service was winding down, but the buzz of conversation was still unusually animated. "However," he said, turning back to her, "there is also a line of people downstairs asking when you will sing again. The phone has not stopped ringing with reservation requests for tomorrow night. It seems your talent has created quite a demand." Mariah felt a flicker of hope, quickly suppressed. She had learned not to trust moments that seemed too good to be true. "But," Gerard continued, and there it was, "I cannot afford to alienate someone like Vincent Ross. Not in this business. Not in this economy." He returned to his desk and pulled out a white envelope. "This is 2 weeks' severance pay and a letter of recommendation. You are a good worker, Mariah. Reliable. Honest. I will make sure you find another position." Mariah took the envelope, her hands surprisingly steady. "Thank you," she said simply. "I am sorry it has to be this way," Gerard said, and he seemed to mean it. "Perhaps if things were different." "Things are what they are," Mariah replied, standing. "Thank you for the opportunity." She walked back through the kitchen, aware of the eyes following her, the conversations that stopped as she passed. At her locker, she changed out of her uniform for the last time, folding it carefully and hanging it on the hook for whoever would replace her. The sheet music was still in her apron pocket. She transferred it to her purse, along with the few personal items she had accumulated over 4 years of working at Le Bernardin. As she headed for the back exit, she nearly collided with Jonathan Mills, the restaurant critic who had been dining at table 12. "Excuse me," he said, slightly out of breath as if he had hurried to catch her. "You're Mariah Johnson, aren't you? The singer?" "I'm a waitress," Mariah corrected automatically, then caught herself. "I was a waitress. I'm Jonathan Mills, from the Metro Food and Arts Weekly," he said, extending his hand. "I wonder if I could have a word with you." Mariah hesitated. She was exhausted, emotionally drained, and wanted nothing more than to go home and try to figure out how she was going to explain to her grandmother and Isaiah that she had lost her job. "It will only take a moment," Jonathan pressed. "What happened in there tonight? That was extraordinary. People need to hear about it." "People were there," Mariah said. "They heard it themselves." "Some people were there," Jonathan corrected. "But stories like yours need to be told. Stories about talent rising above circumstances, about dignity in the face of cruelty, about the power of music to reveal truth." Despite herself, Mariah was intrigued. "What kind of story?" "The kind that matters," Jonathan said simply. "The kind that reminds people that greatness can come from anywhere, that it doesn't respect boundaries of class or race or expectation." They talked for 20 minutes in the alley behind Le Bernardin, Mariah gradually opening up about her life, her family, her dreams that had been put on hold so many times they had begun to feel like memories rather than possibilities. Jonathan listened with the intensity of someone who recognized a story that could change everything. For Mariah, for himself, and for everyone who would eventually read it. "I'd like to write about you," he said finally. "About tonight, about your music, about what it means when someone like Vincent Ross tries to crush someone like you and fails." "But he didn't fail," Mariah pointed out. "I lost my job." "Did you?" Jonathan asked. "Or did you find something more important?" Mariah didn't have an answer for that. Not yet. She took the subway home to the small apartment she shared with Isaiah in a neighborhood that men like Vincent Ross were systematically gentrifying, block by block, family by family. The building was old and the elevator rarely worked, but the rent was manageable and it was theirs. Isaiah was waiting up for her, homework spread across their tiny kitchen table, textbooks stacked beside a laptop that they had bought used 3 years ago and babed ever since. "How was work?" he asked without looking up from his calculus problems. Mariah set down her purse and looked at her little brother. Though at 16 and 6 feet tall, he wasn't so little anymore. He had their mother's eyes and their father's stubborn chin, and dreams bigger than their circumstances had any right to support. "I got fired," she said. Isaiah's pencil stopped moving. He looked up at her, his young face serious. "What happened?" Mariah told him everything. About Vincent Ross, about the sheet music, about the song that had poured out of her like something that had been waiting her whole life to be released. She told him about the applause, about the confrontation, about the choice she had made to stand up for herself even when she knew it would cost her everything. Isaiah listened without interrupting, his expression growing more and more incredulous. "You sang?" he said when she finished. "In front of all those people? You sang Mom's song." "I had to," Mariah said simply. Isaiah was quiet for a long moment, processing everything she had told him. Then, to her surprise, he smiled, the first real smile he had given her in weeks. "I'm proud of you," he said. "Proud of me?" "Isaiah, I lost our income. I don't know how we're going to pay rent, or buy your school supplies, or—" "I'm proud of you," he repeated firmly. "Mom would be proud of you too." That night, Mariah lay awake in the small bed she had given to Isaiah while she slept on the couch, staring at the ceiling and wondering what came next. For 4 years, her life had been predictable, stable, boring. She had known exactly what each day would bring, exactly how much money would come in, exactly how to stretch it to cover their needs. Now everything was uncertain. But for the first time in longer than she could remember, uncertainty felt like possibility rather than threat. Her phone buzzed softly on the coffee table beside her. A text message from a number she didn't recognize. "Hi Mariah, this is Jonathan Mills. I wanted you to know, the story will run in tomorrow's weekend edition. Front page of the arts section. I think you're going to want to see it." Mariah smiled in the darkness and closed her eyes, finally allowing herself to sleep. She had no idea that by morning, everything would change again. Mariah woke to the sound of her phone buzzing insistently on the coffee table. Through the thin walls of their apartment, she could hear Mrs. Chun next door talking loudly on her own phone in rapid Mandarin, which was unusual for 7 in the morning. She sat up, disoriented by the bright sunlight streaming through windows she usually left before dawn for her morning shift at Le Bernardin. The reality of her unemployment hit her fresh, accompanied by a familiar twist of anxiety in her stomach. Her phone showed 17 missed calls and 43 unread text messages. "Isaiah," she called toward the small bedroom. "Did you hear my phone ringing?" "It's been ringing for an hour," came his muffled reply. "I figured you needed the sleep." The first missed call was from her grandmother's neighbor, Mrs. Washington. Mariah's heart clenched. Calls that early usually meant bad news about Grandma Rose's health. But when she called back, Mrs. Washington's voice was excited, almost breathless. "Mariah, baby, you need to get over here right now. Rose is fine. She's more than fine, but you need to see this. Everyone's talking about you, child. Everyone. Talking about me? The newspaper, baby. You're in the newspaper. Front page of the arts section, biggest picture I ever saw. Local waitress's stunning performance exposes ugly truth about elite restaurant culture." That's what it says. And the picture. Oh, honey, the picture of you singing. You look like an angel. Mariah's legs felt suddenly unsteady. "Mrs. Washington, I don't understand. Get over here, baby. Bring Isaiah. Rose is making breakfast and calling everyone she ever met. Your mama would be so proud." The next call was from a number with a Los Angeles area code. "Ms. Johnson? This is Rebecca Martinez from Good Morning America. We saw Jonathan Mills's article in the Metro Weekly and the videos that are circulating online. We'd love to have you on the show to discuss your experience and maybe perform for our audience. Could you call me back as soon as possible?" Mariah sank onto the couch, staring at her phone as if it had become a foreign object. The next message was from someone claiming to be from The Ellen DeGeneres Show. The one after that was from a talent agent in Nashville, then a producer from a local radio station, a booking agent for wedding receptions, and 3 different record labels. "Isaiah," she called, her voice higher than usual. "You need to see this." Her brother emerged from the bedroom in his pajamas, took one look at her face, and sat down beside her on the couch. "What's wrong?" Mariah showed him her phone, scrolling through message after message from people and organizations she had only ever seen on television or read about in magazines. Isaiah's eyes grew wider with each new name. "This is crazy," he whispered. "Mariah, this is actually crazy." They walked to their grandmother's apartment 3 blocks away in a daze, Mariah wearing sunglasses and a baseball cap pulled low, though she wasn't sure why. The streets looked the same as always: cracked sidewalks, chain-link fences, corner bodegas with handwritten signs in Spanish and English. But something felt different. A few people they passed seemed to look at her twice, and Mrs. Rodriguez from the corner store waved enthusiastically from her doorway. Grandma Rose lived in a senior housing complex that was clean but aging, the kind of place where dignity was maintained through sheer force of will despite limited resources. She had lived there for 8 years, ever since her arthritis had made the stairs in their old apartment too difficult to manage. When Mariah and Isaiah arrived, they found Rose's small living room packed with neighbors, all talking at once while Rose held court from her favorite armchair, a copy of Metro Weekly spread across her lap. "There she is," Rose announced as they walked in. "There's my grandbaby, the star." The room erupted in applause and congratulations, a dozen voices speaking over each other. "I always knew that girl had something special. The way she used to sing in church when she was little. Did you see what that rich man tried to do to her? Disgusting. But she showed him, didn't she? She showed all of them." Mariah felt overwhelmed by the attention, the praise, the sudden transformation from invisible waitress to neighborhood celebrity. Rose patted the arm of her chair, and Mariah sat down beside her, accepting the newspaper with trembling hands. The article was everything Jonathan Mills had promised and more. The headline dominated the top of the arts section: "The voice that stopped a restaurant. Local waitress's stunning performance exposes ugly truth about elite restaurant culture." Below it was a photo that someone had taken during her performance. Mariah with her eyes closed, her face tilted slightly upward, her mouth open in song. The image captured something ethereal, transcendent. But it was the article itself that took her breath away. Jonathan had written with the skill of someone who understood that he wasn't just reporting a story. He was telling a truth that needed to be told. He wrote about the systemic racism hidden behind polite smiles and expensive table settings. He wrote about the way wealth was used as a weapon to humiliate and control. He wrote about the courage it took to stand up to someone like Vincent Ross, and the price that courage often demanded. But most of all, he wrote about the power of Mariah's voice, not just her singing voice, but her voice as a human being who refused to be silenced. "Music has always been the language of the oppressed," he had written. "It speaks truths that polite society prefers to ignore, tells stories that comfortable people would rather not hear." When Mariah Johnson sang in Le Bernardin that night, she wasn't just performing a song. She was reclaiming her dignity, her heritage, and her right to be seen as fully human. The article went on to detail Vincent Ross's history of displacing low-income families through his development projects, his pattern of using his wealth to intimidate those who couldn't fight back. It quoted several former employees of his company who spoke anonymously about his treatment of workers, his casual racism, his belief that money gave him the right to treat people as less than human. This story might have ended differently, Jonathan concluded, if Mariah Johnson had simply accepted her place in Vincent Ross's world. If she had sung prettily, accepted his condescension, and disappeared back into the invisibility that society had assigned her. Instead, she chose to stand up. She chose to speak truth to power. And in doing so, she reminded us all that greatness doesn't ask permission, that talent doesn't respect the boundaries that small-minded people try to impose. As Mariah read, the room around her gradually fell quiet. Even Isaiah, reading over her shoulder, was speechless. "Baby," Rose said finally, her voice thick with emotion, "your mama is dancing in heaven right now." Mariah's phone rang again. This time the caller ID showed a local number. "Ms. Johnson? This is Sarah Chun from Channel 7 News. We're doing a story about your experience at Le Bernardin, and we'd love to get your side of what happened. Could we possibly set up an interview today?" Before Mariah could answer, her phone beeped with another call. Then another. The messages were coming so fast now that her phone couldn't keep up. "Mariah," Isaiah said quietly, "I think you need help with this." He was right. In less than 12 hours, her life had transformed from predictable poverty to chaotic possibility, and she had no idea how to navigate any of it. One of Rose's neighbors, Mr. Peterson, who had worked in entertainment law before retiring, offered to make some calls on her behalf. "You need representation, young lady. You need someone who can help you sort through all this attention and figure out what's real and what's just people trying to take advantage." By afternoon, Mariah found herself sitting in the office of Angela Rodriguez, an entertainment lawyer who had driven out from downtown after reading the article. Angela was a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her 40s who had spent 20 years helping talented people avoid the pitfalls of sudden fame. "The good news," Angela said, spreading contracts and messages across her desk, "is that you have genuine interest from legitimate sources. Good Morning America, 3 different record labels, a booking agent who handles some major venues, and a talent manager who's worked with Grammy winners. And the bad news? The bad news is that you also have interest from people who see you as a quick payday. Reality show producers who want to exploit your story, scam artists pretending to be from companies they don't work for, and social media managers who will take your money and disappear." Angela leaned back in her chair, studying Mariah carefully. "The question is, what do you want? Because this moment, this attention, it's not going to last forever. You need to decide quickly what you want to do with it." Mariah thought about the question for a long moment. What did she want? "I want to sing," she said finally. "I want to sing the way my mother never got to. I want to use whatever talent I have to make something beautiful, something that matters. And, and I want Vincent Ross to know that he didn't win. That all his money and power couldn't silence me." Angela smiled. "Now that's something I can work with." That evening, Mariah returned to her apartment to find a crowd gathered outside her building. Reporters with cameras, neighbors with smartphones, curious strangers who had somehow tracked down her address. The attention was both thrilling and terrifying. She slipped in through the back entrance, her heart pounding. Isaiah was waiting for her, having come home earlier to find the same crowd. "This is insane," he said, peering out through the blinds at the people below. "Mrs. Chun says they've been there for hours." Mariah's phone rang again. This time she recognized the number. It was Gerard from Le Bernardin. "Mariah," his accented voice was strained, "I need to speak with you. Could you come to the restaurant? I have a proposal." "Gerard, I don't think." "Please. There have been developments. Things you should know about." An hour later, Mariah sat across from Gerard in the same office where she had been fired less than 24 hours earlier. But the atmosphere was completely different now. "Vincent Ross," Gerard began without preamble, "has been calling me all day. He is, how do you say, furious about the article. He has threatened to sue the newspaper, to sue me, to sue you." Mariah's stomach dropped. "Can he do that?" "He can try, but there is something else. His business partners, his investors, they have been reading the article too. And the comments on social media. Many people are very angry about how he treated you. Gerard pulled out his phone and showed her a series of screenshots. Comments on the various videos of her performance, shares of Jonathan's article, angry responses to Vincent's behavior. His company stock has dropped 12% since this morning, Gerard continued. 3 of his major investors have called emergency meetings. The mayor's office has announced they are reviewing his development contracts. Mariah stared at the phone screen, hardly believing what she was seeing. But that's not why I called you here, Gerard said. I called you because I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. And I would like to offer you your job back. My job back. With a promotion. Assistant manager. A significant raise. Your own section of the dining room. And, he paused dramatically, the opportunity to perform. Once a week, perhaps twice. Dinner music for our guests. It was everything she could have dreamed of 24 hours ago. Financial security, recognition, the chance to sing professionally. But something had changed in her during those 24 hours. The woman who had stood up to Vincent Ross, who had chosen truth over safety, who had watched a powerful man's empire begin to crumble because she refused to be silenced. That woman couldn't go back to being invisible. Thank you, she said carefully. But I need to think about it. Gerard looked surprised. Of course. But please, do not wait too long. The offer, it may not stay available indefinitely. As Mariah walked home through streets that felt both familiar and foreign, she realized that she was facing the biggest decision of her life. She could return to the safety of her old world, with the added bonus of slightly better circumstances and the chance to sing occasionally for wealthy diners. Or she could step fully into the uncertain but limitless world that had opened up to her in the past day. Her phone buzzed with a text from Angela Rodriguez. Good Morning America confirmed. They want you on Monday's show. And I have 3 more calls to make about some very interesting opportunities. Are you ready for this? Mariah looked up at the apartment building that had been home for 3 years, at the neighborhood that had shaped her, at the life that had been enough until it suddenly wasn't. She typed back, I'm ready. But even as she sent the message, she couldn't shake the feeling that Vincent Ross wasn't finished with her yet. Men like him didn't accept defeat easily, and she had humiliated him in the most public way possible. As if summoned by her thoughts, her phone rang one more time. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, but when she answered, the voice was unmistakably Vincent's. We need to talk, he said without preamble. Tonight. There are things you don't understand, consequences you haven't considered. I have nothing to say to you, Mariah replied, but her voice wasn't as steady as she wanted it to be. Oh, but you do, Vincent said, and there was something in his tone that made her blood run cold. You see, I've been doing some research of my own. About you, about your family, about some very interesting financial irregularities in your grandmother's medical bills. Mariah stopped walking. What are you talking about? Medicare fraud is a serious crime, Miss Johnson, even when it's accidental, even when it's just a matter of confused paperwork. The kind of confusion that could send an elderly woman to prison. The threat was clear, and Mariah realized that she had underestimated Vincent Ross. She had thought his power was limited to money and influence, but he had something much more dangerous, the willingness to destroy innocent people to get his revenge. You have 1 hour to meet me, Vincent continued. The parking garage at 5th and Main, level 3. Come alone. And Mariah? Bring that sheet music with you. I think it's time we had a proper conversation about what happens to people who embarrass me. The line went dead, leaving Mariah standing alone on a street corner. Her moment of triumph suddenly transformed into her worst nightmare. The parking garage at 5th and Main was a concrete tomb at 9 o'clock on a Friday night, empty except for the occasional car of someone working late in the office buildings above. Mariah's footsteps echoed off the low ceiling as she made her way to level 3, each step feeling like a march toward her own execution. She had considered not coming. She had considered calling the police, calling Angela Rodriguez, calling anyone who might be able to help. But Vincent's threat had been too specific, too detailed to be a bluff. Somehow, he had found irregularities in her grandmother's medical bills, irregularities that could be twisted into something criminal with the right legal pressure. Vincent was waiting for her beside a black Mercedes, his expensive suit looking out of place in the harsh fluorescent lighting. He wasn't alone. 2 men in dark suits flanked him, their faces blank and professional in the way that suggested they were used to handling Vincent's problems quietly and efficiently. You came. Vincent said, sounding genuinely pleased. I wasn't entirely sure you would. What do you want? Mariah asked, staying several feet away from him. What I want, Vincent replied, is for you to understand the position you've put yourself in. You see, yesterday you were nobody. A waitress. Invisible. Safe. But today, thanks to your little performance and that ridiculous newspaper article, you've become somebody. And being somebody comes with complications. He gestured to one of his companions, who handed him a manila folder. Medicare billing discrepancies. Vincent continued, opening the folder and reading from a document inside. Your grandmother, Rose Johnson, age 73, has been receiving treatments for chronic arthritis and diabetes. Very expensive treatments. But it seems there have been some coding errors, some double billings, some charges for services that may not have been properly documented. Mariah's heart was pounding, but she kept her voice steady. My grandmother isn't responsible for billing errors. She's just a patient. Oh, but she is responsible, Vincent said with mock sadness. You see, she signed forms authorizing treatment. She accepted benefits she may not have been entitled to. And in some cases, it appears she may have even provided false information about her income and assets. That's not true, isn't it? Vincent pulled out another document. This is a bank statement showing a cash deposit of $8,000 in your grandmother's account 6 months ago. Money that wasn't reported to Medicare when they calculated her benefits eligibility. Money that came from, where exactly? Mariah's blood ran cold. The $8,000 had been her mother's life insurance payout. Money she had saved for years and given to Rose to help with her medical expenses. Perfectly legal, but Vincent was right. It hadn't been reported because they hadn't known it needed to be. It doesn't matter if it's true or not, Vincent continued, seeing the recognition in her eyes. What matters is whether I can make it look true. And I can. I have very good lawyers, Miss Johnson. Lawyers who specialize in finding problems that didn't exist until they started looking for them. What do you want? Mariah asked again, her voice barely above a whisper. Vincent smiled, the expression predatory and cold. I want you to disappear. I want you to decline all those television interviews, turn down those record deals, and go back to being nobody. I want you to find a new job, somewhere far from here, perhaps, and live your quiet little life without ever mentioning my name again. And if you don't, your grandmother spends her remaining years in federal prison for Medicare fraud. Your brother watches his college dreams disappear when his family becomes a national scandal. And you? You get to live with the knowledge that your moment of defiance destroyed everyone you love. The garage fell silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of traffic from the street below. Mariah stood frozen, feeling the weight of Vincent's words settling over her like a burial shroud. There's something else, Vincent said, pulling out his phone. Something I thought you might find interesting. He showed her a video that had been taken at Lou Bernardine the night before. It showed her performance, but the angle was different from the other videos that had been circulating. This one focused on her face, on the tears in her eyes, on the way her hands trembled as she held the sheet music. Beautiful, Vincent said. Really quite moving. The problem is, this particular video also shows something very interesting. It shows you taking something from my table. My champagne glass, to be specific. And it shows you slipping something into your pocket after you handled that glass. Mariah stared at the phone screen, confusion replacing fear. I don't understand. The champagne glass tested positive for traces of a rather interesting substance, Vincent continued. Rohypnol, to be specific. A date rape drug. Very illegal. Very serious charges when found in someone's possession. That's impossible, Mariah breathed. I never what? Never slipped it into your pocket when you thought no one was looking? The video suggests otherwise. And a blood test would show that you had traces of the drug in your system. Easy enough to arrange after the fact, if you know the right people. The setup was masterful in its simplicity. Vincent had planted evidence, created a false narrative, and now had video that could be edited to support whatever story he chose to tell. You're insane, Mariah said. But even as she spoke, she realized how helpless she was against this level of calculated malice. I'm thorough, Vincent corrected. You embarrassed me in front of people whose respect I require for my business. You cost me money, reputation, and influence. Did you really think I would just let that go? He stepped closer to her, and his two companions moved with him, boxing her in against a concrete pillar. "Here's what's going to happen," Vincent said. "You're going to go home tonight and think very carefully about your choices. Tomorrow morning, you're going to call that lawyer of yours and tell her you've changed your mind about all those opportunities. You're going to disappear from public view, and you're going to stay disappeared. And if you don't, by Monday morning your grandmother will be arrested for Medicare fraud. By Tuesday, you'll be charged with possession of a controlled substance with intent to distribute. By Wednesday, your brother will watch his family's reputation destroyed on national television. And by Thursday, you'll all be forgotten, just another sad story about poor people who thought they could rise above their station." Vincent started to turn away, then paused as if remembering something important. "Oh, and Miss Johnson, that sheet music you're so fond of, the one with your mother's handwriting on it, I'd be very careful with that if I were you. Sentimental items have a way of disappearing when people aren't careful about where they leave them." The threat to her mother's memory was the final straw. Something inside Mariah snapped, and before she could think about the consequences, she was speaking. "You think you've won," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "You think your money and your power make you untouchable. But you've made one mistake." Vincent turned back to her, eyebrows raised in amusement. "Oh, and what's that? You forgot that other people have phones too." Mariah pulled out her own phone, holding it up so Vincent could see the screen. It showed a call in progress, the timer indicating it had been running for nearly 10 minutes. "Angela Rodriguez," Mariah said. "My lawyer. She's been listening to every word you've said." Vincent's face went white, then red, then white again. "You little. Every threat you made," Mariah continued, her voice now carrying the same power it had held when she sang. "Every admission of evidence tampering, every detail of your plan to frame my grandmother and destroy my family. All recorded." One of Vincent's companions reached for her phone, but Mariah stepped back quickly. "The call is being recorded on her end too," she said, "and automatically backed up to the cloud. Even if you destroy my phone, copies already exist." For the first time since she had known him, Vincent Ross looked genuinely afraid. "You don't understand," he said, his composure cracking. "You have no idea what kind of people you're dealing with, what I'm capable of." "I know exactly what kind of person I'm dealing with," Mariah interrupted. "A bully, a coward, someone who builds his power by destroying other people because he's too weak to create anything himself." She started walking toward the exit, her phone still held high. "The difference between us," she called back to him, "is that you use your voice to tear people down. I use mine to lift them up. And in the end, that's what people will remember." Vincent's shout echoed through the garage behind her, but Mariah didn't stop walking. She had learned something important in the past 2 days. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to be afraid. But as she reached her car, her hands shaking as she unlocked the door, she realized that her confrontation with Vincent Ross was far from over. Men like him didn't give up easily, and now she had humiliated him twice. The war was just beginning. 3 days later, Mariah stood in the wings of the Good Morning America studio, her heart pounding with a different kind of nervousness than she had felt in the restaurant. This time, she wasn't being forced to perform for someone else's amusement. This time, she was choosing to share her voice with the world. The events following her confrontation with Vincent Ross had moved with dizzying speed. Angela Rodriguez had immediately turned the recording over to both the FBI and the local district attorney's office. Vincent's attempt to frame Mariah had backfired spectacularly when investigators discovered that the video he had shown her was doctored and the evidence he claimed to have planted was fabricated. More damaging to Vincent was the investigation that followed. Once authorities started looking closely at his business practices, they found a pattern of intimidation, fraud, and corruption that went back years. The Medicare billing irregularities he had threatened to use against Rose Johnson were revealed to be part of a larger scheme involving several healthcare facilities that Vincent owned, facilities where he had been systematically overbilling government programs while providing substandard care to elderly patients. But it was the media attention that truly brought Vincent down. The story of his attempt to destroy Mariah's family in revenge for her standing up to him captured public imagination in a way that financial crimes never could. Social media exploded with #JusticeForMariah hashtags. Protesters gathered outside Vincent's office buildings. His investors fled, his business partners distanced themselves, and his carefully constructed empire began to crumble. Mariah, we're ready for you." The producer's voice brought her back to the present. Through the studio monitors, she could see the morning show hosts discussing her story, the same photo from Jonathan Mills's article displayed on the screen behind them. Our next guest is a young woman whose incredible voice and remarkable courage have inspired millions of people around the world, the host was saying. Mariah Johnson was working as a waitress when a wealthy businessman tried to humiliate her by forcing her to sing. Instead, she delivered a performance that has been viewed over 50 million times online and sparked a national conversation about dignity, respect, and the power of standing up to bullies. Mariah walked onto the set, her legs steadier than she had expected. The studio lights were bright and warm, and the host greeted her with genuine smiles that put her at ease. "Mariah, thank you for being here," the female host said. "Tell us about that night at Le Bernardin. What was going through your mind when Vincent Ross demanded that you sing?" For the next 10 minutes, Mariah told her story with the same honesty and grace that had characterized everything she had done since that night. She spoke about her mother's dreams, about the dignity of work regardless of what kind of work it was, about the courage it takes to stand up for yourself when you have everything to lose. "We understand you've received some incredible opportunities since then," the male host said. "Can you tell us about what's next for you?" Mariah smiled, thinking about the phone calls and meetings that had filled the past few days. 3 record labels were competing to sign her. A Broadway producer wanted to discuss a potential role in an upcoming musical. A documentary filmmaker wanted to tell her story on a larger scale. But the opportunity that excited her most was the one that had come from the most unexpected source. "Actually," she said, "I want to tell you about something very special that's happening next week. I'm going to be performing at a benefit concert for elderly care advocacy, something that's become very important to me since learning about the problems in that industry." She paused, savoring the moment. "The concert is being held at the newly renamed Rose Johnson Community Center. That's my grandmother's name. The center was formerly owned by Vincent Ross, but it's been turned over to community management as part of the legal settlement from his case." The hosts exchanged glances, clearly not expecting this news. And Mariah continued, "I'll be performing with some very special guests. Isaiah Johnson, my brother, who's an incredible pianist and is starting at Juilliard next fall on a full scholarship. And Rose Johnson herself, my grandmother, who it turns out has a pretty amazing voice of her own." The audience erupted in applause, but Mariah wasn't finished. "The concert is free to the public, but we're asking people to bring donations for local food banks and senior care programs. Because the thing I've learned over the past week is that having a voice isn't just about being able to sing. It's about using whatever platform you have to lift up others." After the interview, Mariah was escorted to a smaller studio where she would perform for the show's online audience. She had chosen the same song she had sung that night at Le Bernardin, but this time it would be different. This time, she was singing it by choice, for people who wanted to hear it, in honor of everyone who had ever had their voice silenced. As she stood at the microphone, looking out at the cameras that would carry her voice to millions of people around the world, Mariah thought about the journey that had brought her here. A week ago, she had been invisible, voiceless, powerless. Today, she was using her voice to change the world, one song at a time. She began to sing, and her voice filled the studio with the same power and beauty that had stopped a restaurant full of people in their tracks. But this time, there was something new in her voice: confidence, joy, and the unmistakable sound of someone who had found exactly where they belonged. "Someone to watch over me," she sang. And as the final note faded, she knew that someone was watching over her, her mother, whose dreams lived on in every note Mariah sang. 3 months later, Mariah stood on the stage of the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C., performing at a gala for civil rights organizations. In the audience sat her grandmother Rose, radiant in a new dress and free from the medical worries that had plagued her for years, thanks to the legal settlement and Mariah's new income. Beside Rose sat Isaiah, home from his first semester at Juilliard and preparing to accompany his sister on piano for the evening's final song. Also in the audience, though in a very different capacity, sat Vincent Ross. He was attending as part of his community service requirement, having pled guilty to fraud charges and accepted a deal that included significant financial penalties, community service, and a complete restructuring of his business practices. His empire was gone, his reputation destroyed, But he was learning, slowly and painfully, what it meant to be accountable for his actions. As Mariah began to sing, her voice soaring through the concert hall with the power and beauty that had launched her career, she caught Vincent's eye. For a moment, their gazes held across the darkened auditorium. Then Mariah smiled, not with cruelty or triumph, but with the grace of someone who had chosen forgiveness over revenge, growth over bitterness. She had learned that the most powerful victory wasn't in destroying her enemy, but in refusing to let him destroy her. Her voice filled the hall, carrying a message of hope and resilience that touched every person present. And in that moment, Mariah Johnson, no longer a waitress, no longer invisible, no longer powerless, understood that she had found her true purpose. She had found her voice, and she would use it for the rest of her life to make sure that others found theirs too. As the final note of her performance faded into thunderous applause, Mariah thought of her mother's words. Music isn't just sound, baby girl. It's truth. It's everything we can't say with words alone. Tonight, Mariah had spoken her truth to the world, and the world had listened. In the end, that was the most beautiful song of all.